So do you want to just start talking about the issue that optimism versus pessimism, or did you want to continue what we were discussing before?
No, let's do optimism and pessimism, and in a month or so we can get back to government and other issues, 3L, NAP, whatever.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, I'll start. What's the case for pessimism? Well, the case for pessimism, just from a personal point of view, I've been in this for, I don't know, since 1963, 1964, when I became a libertarian. And we haven't made much progress. We had some really good people. Ayn Rand was magnificent. I don't agree with everything she said, but my goodness, that Atlas Shrugged came out in 1957 and it's still selling. And this is more than 50 years later, and I think it sells over 100,000 copies. And then we had Ron Paul, and Ron Paul was, I guess, to us what Bernie Sanders is to the young kid socialists. And Ron Paul got 1% of the vote, and Ayn Rand was excoriated and hated by everybody. Well, not by everybody, not by libertarians, but by our friends on the left. Sometimes I think it's sort of like the rock of Sisyphus. You push the rock up the hill, and then the rock comes down. You push it up, and then you come down. Joe, I forget the latest woman who ran for president on the Libertarian Party ticket, Jo Jorgensen. She was no Ron Paul, but she was excellent. She was very good, and she got the usual percent or 0.5% or 1.5%. So that's where we are. I mean, and we have so many institutions. We have the Libertarian Party, we have the Mises Institute, we have your new initiative, the 3L initiative, which is very new, so I can't blame it on you. But I mean, you're just starting. But I think every state has a think tank. In Louisiana, we have the Pelican Institute. And there are Austrian libertarian think tanks around the world. I mean, all through Europe, South America. Canada has got one, the Fraser Institute. I used to work there. We have the Free State Project. Everyone should move to New Hampshire, and we'll take over New Hampshire. We have a lot of very bright people working really hard at promoting liberty. And look at us. You're going to tape record this, and you're going to get an audience of this of maybe 5,000 people. Maybe, I don't know, but in a just world, we'd be on Broadway or something. I don't know, and we'd have 10 million people listening to this because we're leaders in the libertarian movement, and the libertarian movement is the last best hope for mankind. Okay, so now comes the question of why is it that we're doing so badly? Is it just an accident? Is it just that we're not smart enough, that Ron Paul and Ayn Rand are not good enough, and Milton Friedman, I would maybe put him in third place in terms of number of converts. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Milton Friedman, but, compared to what? The joke, the Economist was asked, how is your wife? And the answer was, compared to what? Well, Milton Friedman, compared to Krugman, well, Milton Friedman is God. Compared to Murray Rothbard, okay, he's not so good, but what the heck? And we had the Chicago School of Economics and the Austrian School of Economics and the Mises Institute. I'm a big fan of the Mises Institute, and there's the Cato Institute, there's Reason, there's, I don't know, a Perk in Montana. There must be 35 national libertarian think tanks. And all, and what do we got? We got a minimum wage going up, and we got Joe Biden going berserk. And if Donald had won, well, it would be a little bit better. But Donald is no libertarian. Okay, he was good on taxes and good on regulation, but very bad on international trade. He wasn't for free trade, and he was no libertarian. So, and he lost. So this is, I think, the case for pessimism. And that's like a 5-minute version. And why don't you have your opening discussion, and then I'll try to say why I think it is that we're in the doldrums.
Okay. Well, let me start with something I heard Butler Schaefer say on many occasions. There's Butler right there. Butler, like you, was around a long time ago, back when people started sort of coining the phrase libertarian. And Butler remembers when the group of libertarians was so small that everybody who was a libertarian could meet in one apartment, right? And then if somebody said they were traveling to Philadelphia, someone else would say, "Oh, we got a libertarian in Philadelphia." How far are we past that now? Not only do we have a libertarian party in practically every state, and there actually are some libertarians in the Libertarian Party, which I think is very nice as well. But there are a substantial number of libertarians in every state now. To say that there's a libertarian in this state, are you kidding? You know how many libertarians are in every single state? So I don't agree that there's been very, very little progress. I think probably I share your frustration that there should be much more progress. And I think there are reasons why we haven't had as much progress as we should. Let me start with Jo Jorgensen. She came and spoke here in Arizona not that long ago, and I was asked to give a speech before she went up and spoke. And very nice lady, and she certainly understands libertarianism, but she spoke for 1.5 hours out here, Walter, and she did what almost all libertarians do. They talk about this issue, then they talk about that issue, then they talk about the next issue, and not once did she mention the one thing that everybody who came there who was frustrated with Trump and Biden and didn't like either of those choices, which was most people who voted, in my opinion. The one thing they needed to hear when they came to hear about what are these libertarians about, which is something called the non-aggression principle. Do you know, Walter, she never mentioned it once. She went from issue to issue to issue and never mentioned the one very elegant, very common sense, very practical, very moral, very just principle that is the root of every single thing that we believe in as libertarians. It's the one thing that binds us together. You talk about Ayn Rand, and Rand, I don't think was a libertarian. I think she had bad things to say about libertarians. She started objectivism. And as you know, Atlas Shrugged, a very widely read book by lots of people, but not the average person. That book is so thick and such a big, tough, long read. If you're talking about getting to the masses, Atlas Shrugged isn't going to get you there. And Atlas Shrugged is a fictional story. It's a great story, and you can get through there and get Galt's speech in there, the heart of kind of what objectivism about. But this doesn't resonate with most people. I'm told if you go to the Live and Let Live website, Walter, you're going to see a 1-minute video and then another 1-minute video. I would love to give them a 3-hour speech, but I'm told that's the attention span we're working with. Milton Friedman and Walter, I love the work that you economists do. And it's the case for, hey, by the way, not only is this non-aggression principle just and moral, but it also results in higher standards of living. But as you and I would agree, even if it didn't, that wouldn't change our position on things. And the average person isn't very interested in listening to a PhD in economics go on and on about why capitalism raises standards. You and I might be interested. I love to hear things like that. But the average person, this does not resonate with them. And libertarians, as you know, the movement is packed with brilliant people, brilliant philosophers and brilliant economists. But it's the average person who we need to reach. And Ron Paul, as great a communicator as he was, I never heard him mention the non-aggression principle. He didn't answer every question the way I would answer every question if I was in politics, which would go something like this. Mr. Victor, how do you feel about issue X? Thank you very much for that question. I feel about issue X the same way I feel about all issues. See, there's this one principle at the center of my belief system that I care about. Here's what it's called. Here's what it means. And now let's apply it. And eventually, people will start rolling their eyes and say, yes, we know there's this one principle. We know how it works. Isn't that the one thing we've got to communicate, we have done, and I say the collective we, us libertarians, have done a horrible job reaching out to the average person to get them to understand the one principle. And part of the reason is we don't talk about it at all. And this is part of the reason why I think, despite the progress we've made, and by the way, still on that point, let me go back to that for 1 second here. Not only are there lots more libertarians, despite our awful marketing of this elegant, very simple principle that we have, not only are there many libertarians, but we've got a lot of victories that I noticed you didn't mention, Walter. Back when I started practicing law as a criminal defense lawyer about 27 years ago, I came out pretty ferocious out of law school, and I want to argue about lots of things like legalized marijuana. And do you know, of course, the prosecutors didn't agree with me, but even the defense attorneys, I had trouble getting to agree with me. And they said, Mark, you're in Arizona. This is a very conservative, the day will never come when marijuana will be legal. Yet, here we are, Walter. Now, we didn't do a good job making the argument. I wrote an article entitled Stop Arguing That Marijuana is Not Harmful, because I don't think it's harmful, but this isn't our argument. I don't care if it's harmful or not. Stop arguing that it treats medical conditions. Maybe it does, and I think it does, but this isn't our argument at all. The one argument we needed to make, the only argument we needed to make is you own you. And that's the reason you are in charge of your own body and you get to put into it whatever you like. We didn't make that argument. We're afraid. I don't know why we don't make that argument, but nonetheless, people have become more open-minded on this issue, more tolerant on this issue, a word that I'm going to get back to here in a minute. And not only that, Walter, but gay rights. We heard a few years back, it would be the destruction of the American family if people from same-sex couples got to declare themselves married, and yet it happened and the sky didn't fall. And this was a major victory for freedom in the civil liberties area. Also, euthanasia is moving in the right direction. Why are these things occurring? They're occurring because people are becoming a little bit more open-minded and a little bit more tolerant. Now, where libertarianism misses the boat is it doesn't talk about ethics at all beyond the non-aggression principle. And because of this, we lose the argument with our liberal friends who are speaking from the heart when they say, hey, I think we should help those less fortunate than us. I think we should get everybody access to affordable health care and this, that, and all these, endless parade of issues. We libertarians, the only thing we get to talk about here is, look, this violates the principle and taxation violates the principle. And we sort of leave it at that. We talk about a little bit with private charity, but I want to agree with them. I want to say, look, this goes beyond the principle we're talking about, but I agree with you. We should be more open-minded and more tolerant. And I know this is beyond the non-aggression principle, and that's fine. I'm not arguing about the non-aggression principle, but live and let live has ethical values like open-minded, tolerance, voluntary kindness, civility, increasing human happiness, decreasing human suffering. Why do we do this? We do this for two reasons. Number one, we actually do need people to be open-minded if they're ever going to say, look, this is okay, you run your life however you want, I'll run my life. If we're going to get them to warm up to the non-aggression principle, we need them to be more open-minded and more tolerant. And number two, this gets a very important point about talking about the difference between the legal world and the moral world. And we've done a horrible job. Nobody's even talking about this, the difference, the critical difference between the legal world and the moral world. So to sort of wrap that up, I think we do a horrible job marketing the principle, which is why I've tried my best to improve this by creating a different principle, slightly different, called the live and let live principle. People don't know what the non-aggression principle means. They don't like it generally. It sounds too philosophical for them. Live and let live, they love. Also, when you said you didn't like Trump very much, I know, and I didn't talk to you about this, Walter, but I know you were pushing libertarians for Trump. Okay, maybe Trump would have been better than Biden in some ways. And as it turns out, I thought at least we'd get Biden willing to take marijuana off the Schedule I federal list. And apparently now we're not even going to get that. So as it turns out, maybe Trump is better than Biden. I don't know. Who knows? Maybe Trump would have blown up the world by insulting little rocket man, or who knows what would have happened. So this is a counterfactual and we don't know. But when we say we're libertarians for Trump, libertarians have no business being for Trump. Trump doesn't know about the non-aggression principle, doesn't care about the non-aggression principle, and is happy to violate the non-aggression principle. So I think we got to be very careful about saying things like that, because Trump is not a libertarian or anything close to a libertarian. We should be libertarians for libertarianism, if you will, not libertarians for authoritarianism. So horrible job marketing the non-aggression principle, horrible job explaining it. And notwithstanding that, the truth and validity of our principle is yet still rolling down the road, and we're still making progress in some areas. I'll grant not all areas, but in some areas we're making progress. And I think we should, guys like you and I think this should happen overnight, and it should happen a lot faster. It hasn't happened fast enough, but we shouldn't ignore the progress that we've already made.
Very well said. I think you're making an excellent case, and I'll help you a little bit, because what we're trying to do is get at the truth, and we're not having a debate to, who won. We're out of this. I think we both agree the goal is to get a little closer to the truth.
Yes.
And a little bit better understanding of what's going on. So let me help you a little bit. Not only have we legalized marijuana, but in Oregon, they've legalized heroin and cocaine.
Yes.
Which, when you say marijuana will never be legalized, you don't even mention heroin and cocaine. That's just silly to mention. And yet there is that move. And then there's the another positive thing is the airplane business. It used to be that the airline regulation was very, very heavy. And then we had a relaxing on the regulation, and now planes can go anywhere they want. And before they had all sorts of controls on where airplanes can go. And now air flight is a lot cheaper. Forget about the pandemic, but even before the pandemic. So we've had some good things. On the other hand, the minimum wage is going to be going up, and no longer are they bringing policies in the billions. Now they're talking trillions. Pretty soon it'll be quadrillions and quintillions and sextillions the way they're going. So that's on the bad side. So it's a mixed bag. I remember when I first met Murray, I went on a trip with two friends, and we went from New York all the way to California. And what Murray did, he said, there's a libertarian in Pittsburgh. And then there's one in Chicago, and then there's one in Denver. And every couple of 100 miles, there was one libertarian. And now, as you say, each state convention has got, I speak at the Libertarian state conventions, and there'll be 200 people at the Mississippi Libertarian State Convention. And Mississippi is not the biggest group. I mean, California, there'll be thousands, or New York. So it's a mixed bag. I wanted to say that just because I'm making the case for pessimism doesn't mean that people should stop trying. And I'm an example of that. I'm a pessimist. I don't think we're going to win for 100,000 years, if then, but that doesn't keep me from trying. And part of the reason I want to try is I want to succeed, even though I think it's unlikely. Part of the reason is it's just so enjoyable. I can't imagine doing anything else that's even within a million miles of promoting liberty. I mean, I like chess, I like Mozart, and it's good to have hobbies, but, compared to promoting liberty, Mozart and chess and athletics is just nowhere. So don't anyone think that because I think the case for pessimism is stronger than the case for optimism, that I'm telling people to stop. No, get out there and push. Okay, I wanted to comment on a few things. Libertarians for Trump. Look, what me and my colleagues did on Libertarians for Trump, we started this in the 2015 for the 2016 election, because we thought Trump would be better than Hillary. And again, we thought Trump would be better than Biden. And the idea was that if you're in a red state or a blue state, vote for the Libertarian, because Donald either is going to win big or lose big, and he's not going to need your vote anyway. So vote Libertarian. But if you're in a purple state where it's really close, then, give Donald a little help, because, we don't want Hillary and we don't want Biden. And I make no apologies for this. I think it's a reasonable compromise between promoting liberty, and also promoting liberty through the Libertarian Party, and promoting liberty, taking the lesser of two evils. And I think the Democrats are more evil. Certainly Hillary and Biden. There might be Democrats that would be better than some Republicans. And I think we're equidistant from both overall. The left is a little bit better on personal liberties. The right is a little bit better on economics. They're both horrible on foreign policy. Although, God bless Donald, he talks about pulling troops out. I mean, Ron Paul, if Ron Paul were president, there'd be no no U.S. troops stationed aboard. But, he made peace in the Middle East, and, he was trying to get people out of Afghanistan, and he didn't succeed. But Hillary wouldn't have done that, I don't think. Another point, you mentioned, well, not everybody uses the non-aggression principle. Well, there's one person whose middle name is practically NAP, and that's Murray Rothbard. And certainly Murray talks about that. And you and I, who are devotees of Murray, also follow him in this regard. So you're right. Ayn Rand, the book is, it's only 1,200 pages of type this big. Stop exaggerating. And, I must have read that book every 10 years since I read it in 1963. And I get something out of it, but I've never read the Galt speech, because it's just boring. It's like 100 pages of, I don't know what. Now, it's true Ayn Rand was Ayn Rand was a libertarian. She didn't call herself a libertarian. She called us hippies of the right, but she was a libertarian. I don't care what she calls herself. And she had other baggage about the epistemology and God knows what. And she had smoking was great. Don't ask, because she smoked, and she sort of personalized the thing. Another argument for pessimism is this I forget what the thing is. It's a report. You take a survey. And it turns out, and you get AJKL or something, and somebody else gets PQRT. And I forget what the thing is called, but virtually all libertarians are like 3% of the population when you take this personality test, which is, I mean, libertarians look at things from a rationalistic point of view and not an emotional point of view. On the other hand, we don't really have to convert the average man. The average man doesn't really care about politics. The average man only cares about politics every 2 or every 4 years. What you have to do is get the movers and shakers, or the leaders of humanity, and not worry about that. On another point for the pessimism is guns. Pretty much, you better go buy a gun, because the way Biden is talking, it's going to be hard to get guns or ammunition. Okay, now let me just talk briefly about why I think it is that we have so much trouble. And my reasoning is sociobiology. So what's sociobiology? Sociobiology is the theory that we are the way we are now because of what it took to live and leave genetic material to the next generation 1 million years ago, or however long ago it was that we're in the caves or in the trees. For example, more people now die from bathtubs than snakes. Milton Friedman died from a bathtub. He slipped on a bathtub. He hit his head on the side, and he died en route to the hospital. Many more people die from bathtubs than snakes. And yet, we are afraid of snakes. We're not afraid of bathtubs. Who's afraid of a bathtub? The whole thing is ridiculous. But a snake, you see a snake and you go like this. And even little kids who aren't trained, they'll be scared of a snake. Why? Well, 1 million years ago, if you were not afraid of a bathtub, you didn't have any competitive advantage because there were no bathtubs. But if you were not afraid of a snake, if you go up to a snake and pat him and say, are you a friendly snake? You didn't leave as much genetic material to the next generation as people who were afraid of snakes. So we are hardwired to be afraid of snakes. Men are hardwired to be good at finding distances, because in the caves or in the trees, men would go hunting 30 miles away. And if they couldn't find their way back to the cave, they didn't leave their genetic material as much as people had a good sense of direction. So men have a very good sense of direction. I hate to be sexist about this, but This is part of sociobiology, whereas women stuck closer to the cave and they pick berries, and they have to be very knowledgeable about things. There was this test where it was a fake test. You were brought and you were told, sit in this room and we'll come call for you in about 10 minutes and then we'll give you the test. But the test was really in that room. And in that room, there were 300 different objects. And what they did is they asked men, well, how many objects did you remember in that room after they leave the room? And they could mention 3. And the women could mention, 75% of them. Women are much more meticulous about details like that. Why? Because they had to know which berries were good and which berries weren't good. And if they screwed that up, they didn't leave that much genetic material. Okay. We are hardwired for benevolence. In our tribe, if you got sick this week, I help you. Next week, I get sick, you help me. Our tribe survives. This other tribe, Cro-Magnon or whatever the other tribe was, they have the same upper body strength, the same brain, the same opposable thumb, the same everything, only they don't have benevolence. And if you're sick this week, I say the hell with you, and next week I'm sick and you're not around to help me, that tribe didn't survive. So we are hardwired for that. I mean, right now we're in a debate or a discussion, and if somebody keeled over and had a hard time breathing, we would give him the Heimlich maneuver. We would stop this debate. We would, we're decent people. 99.9% of us are decent people, and we would call an ambulance, or we'd be very upset about somebody choking to death, because we're hardwired for that. But we're not hardwired for markets. I get freshman students in and I tell them what price gouging is, and they go, price gouging, oh, that's evil. Or I tell them what the minimum wage is all about, and they say, oh, that's great, we got to help the poor. And these are bright kids, they're freshmen, but they're hardwired in favor of explicit benevolence. Explicit benevolence, whereas the free enterprise system is implicit benevolence. The idea that you can make a profit, and somehow Adam Smith says that's the way nations get wealthy, by making a profit and selling and buying, that's alien to them. They're not hardwired for that. It's a big struggle to get through to them, and I don't get through to all of my students, but I get through to some. But that's because they're hardwired against it. But whereas if I were to tell them, be nice, and if somebody is choking to death, I don't have to tell them that. They come into the class and it's in their gut. They're hardwired for it. That is why we are going to have a hard time converting anyone to economic liberty, because economic liberty, it's a thing in the brain. It's not in the gut. Whereas benevolence, explicit benevolence, is in the gut. And not only that, but also in our tribe that survived, we would listen to the leader. Because the only way to get the mammoth is all 20 of us have to work together, and if you need somebody to say, well, you go get this leg and you go get that leg, or whatever they said. Well, we're hardwired to listen to leaders, and unfortunately, sometimes, or a lot of times, the leader is not a free enterpriser. Ron Paul and Ayn Rand and Murray Rothbard and Milton Friedman, yes, they're good leaders, but there are very few of them. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, it's a mixed bag. In some ways, we have made progress, and certainly I started in '63. And you know what I asked Murray in 1964, maybe it was '65. I said, "How many libertarians are in the world?" And you know what he said? 25. 25. And now, how many libertarians are there in the world? Maybe 25 million. Give or take. I'm just guessing. I'm trying to use the number 25. So we've increased by 1 million-fold. On the other hand, when I started in the 60s, how many people were there? There were, 2 billion, and now there are 3.5 billion. No, 7 billion. There were 3 billion, and now there are 7 billion. So what happened is that the size of the population doubled. And we went from 25 to 25 million. So if you look at it proportionally, we're we're doing really well. But if you look at it in gross numbers, they went from I don't know 3 million minus 25 to 7 million billion minus 25 million. Namely, they got a lot more statists now relatively to the libertarians. So I rest my case. It's your turn.
Thanks, Walter. I think you made some of my case for me, Walter. We've had you're telling me we've had a millionfold increase, and we've had this horrible marketing where we're not even talking about the one principle that we hold so dear. I think this is good news. Let me start with economics. I like economics. I'm glad we have economists out there to talk about these issues, but I don't think this is the way to get to people's hearts about the principle that we're talking about. I don't think we have to explain this to them. Why are we even talking about this? I don't think it's our best argument. I don't even think it is an argument. So what is my response to that? What we need to convince them of is basically free trade is moral. That's all. Free trade doesn't violate the rule. That's all. We don't have to go any further than that. If they just understand that it's wrong to violate the rule, we don't even have to talk about capitalism. As you know, I have abandoned the argument that capitalism is better than socialism. I take no position on that anymore. Of course, I think capitalism is better than socialism, but why do I have to make this argument? The only thing I have to say is, look, don't violate the rule. Once we explain the rule, first of all, they like the rule. Once they already like live and let live. Most of them around the world like that. Once I say, don't you think it's wrong to be an aggressor? That violates live and let live. Almost everybody says yes. It's a very short step to go from don't initiate force or fraud or coercion. And if they're sophisticated, I'll say don't engage in substantial risks to other people or threats to other people, whichever you prefer. People will agree on that. Once I've got their agreement on that, I have free market. I have free market capitalism already. I don't have to take another step. I've already outlawed crony capitalism. I don't have to take another step. Voluntary socialism is perfectly consistent with libertarianism. I don't have to say another thing there. And the only thing I have to say about socialism is, look, do whatever you like, but you don't have any right to drag anybody into it. If that be only because that violates the rule. And that's the only thing I've got to say. I don't need to talk about Laffer curves or why price gouging actually gets more products into the market so we can increase the supply and eventually the price will come down. We don't have to talk about, that's all true. If somebody says, by the way, how would this shake out? I'll send them to Walter Block and you can explain to them very easily and in a technical way that this works out just fine. But even if it didn't work out just fine, it's not a big deal. I recognize, to go through some of your arguments, I recognize that things are moving in the wrong direction economically. That is to say that people are violating the rule all over the place in economics. These are people who don't even never heard of the rule and don't understand the rule. But on the other side, this will create opportunities for us to start talking about something new. As the frustration in the world or in the country even gets higher and higher, because it will, right? Because the economic policies that are being pursued right now will result in less prosperity for everybody. That will result in more frustration and maybe a recession, maybe a depression. I don't know. These are the perfect times to start. These are perfect opportunities to start talking about new, and I put that in quotes, new ideas or new ideas to people who have not yet heard about them. So this is also cause for optimism. Guns. I'm not worried about guns at all right now. People who aren't paying attention are looking towards the different policies. Frankly, some of these policies are no big deal. I'm not bothered at all by background checks. If you think that people who have violent felony convictions pose a substantial risk merely by having a gun in their hand, which I do, because they have a proven history of violating the principle, then the only way I know of to even make an effort to try to figure out if we have such a person with a gun is to do a background check. I'm not bothered the least bit by that. Now, as to whether any of this stuff is going to succeed, This is the most pro Second Amendment United States Supreme Court we have ever had in the history of our country. The Heller case was decided with Justice Ginsburg was in on that. She's gone. Now we have Justice Barrett, who's very pro Second Amendment. So they can pass whatever they want, but you and I both know the power in our country resides at the Supreme Court to simply strike things down. I think that is what's going to happen. So I'm not the least bit worried about the gun issue. I am not hearing anybody or very few people saying, look, nobody should have a gun. I don't think that's what's being said. I think they're saying some sort of crazy things about certain types of guns. They call guns assault weapons. I made the case today talking to kids in a school that could be an assault pen. If I assault you with the pen, weapons don't assault people. People holding weapons assault people sometimes. Sometimes they use them to defend other people and save their lives. Your point about human nature is an interesting point, and I like talking about that. Are we hardwired for benevolence? I hope so. There's nothing inconsistent about that in our principle. Also, I think cooperation is very much in line with our principle. I also think one thing I can say about human nature that I think that many economists like you would agree. One thing we can say predictably about people is they act in ways they believe are in their self-interest. I think that's something we can take to the bank. That's all we need. If we have that, and I know we have that, all we got to do is explain to them that this principle we like so well, if we simply adopted this and contoured the law, not our morality, that's a different question, but the law, this is actually in your self-interest. When you say people aren't hardwired for markets, I say, so what? We don't need that. People are hardwired to act in their self-interest. We do need that. And they listen to leaders. Okay, the best leaders, they think win-win. Win-win is very consistent with our principle. Our principle is win-win. So everything that I can think of in terms of human nature, I believe is very consistent with the live and let live principle, or the non-aggression principle, if you prefer. I think also, if you add into the non-aggression principle what I call the aspirational values, this is also consistent with many of the things you talked about in human nature, as you said. Benevolence, if somebody was having a choking thing or a heart attack, we'd stop the debate right now. This is consistent with open-minded intolerance and voluntary kindness. These are the kinds of things we need to convince people to sometimes fill in the gaps of people who are born in horribly unfortunate circumstances. All we need to say is, look, it violates principles of justice to steal money from people and help them, but we still want to help them. Let's inspire people to help them. This is how you get if you want a virtuous society, and I do, you have to inspire people to act ways ethically that go beyond our principle. I think we should do more of that. I think this attracts more people and gets them to listen to our principle. The much younger Mark Victor would lead with things like, I think we should legalize methamphetamine. I wrote an article about this about maybe 20 years ago. Legalize methamphetamine with an exclamation point was the title. I stand behind everything I said there. But you know, I've noticed, Walter, that when I hand people that article, they read the title, they don't even want to read the article, right? Or if I lead with, we should abolish government or something like that, this turns people off. Or if I lead with taxation is theft, this turns people off and they don't listen to what we have to say. We need to lead with the principle. And I think we can do this. I think we just need to do a better job marketing it. So I guess just to kind of conclude that, I think human nature is very consistent with the non-aggression principle. I think that's the reason we have to the extent we have a civilized society at all. It's because it's not just 3% of the population. They may self-identify as libertarians, but I would say the vast majority of people in their hearts actually are libertarians or live and let livers. They don't know that because we haven't defined it for them. But most people don't go around violating the non-aggression principle or the live and let live principle. Most people, at least in a one-on-one situation, they act mostly in accordance with the non-aggression principle. Where they fall off the bandwagon, because we have done a very bad job explaining that this principle should still apply not just when we're in an individual setting, but if we're in a group setting. Nothing changes if we're in a group setting. And even if it's a big group, and I've noticed when I lead with corporations, our friends on the left like this, right? When I say even the corporation shouldn't violate the principle, they'll agree with that because they're frustrated that some corporations have benefited from what we call crony capitalism. And we've allowed them to attack corporations and, if you will, capitalism when they're talking about crony capitalism. And all we're trying to say is don't violate the rule. So it's a really small step from there to say, look, even very big groups that we call governments, they shouldn't be able to violate the principle either. This is to say, don't you think that the government shouldn't be initiating force or fraud or coercion or putting people at substantial risks of such things? When people think about it in those terms, this is a very easy sell. So I think we have been our own worst enemy. And despite the horrible job that we have done in terms of trying to explain, of course, I'm not indicting all libertarians. There's some very good ones out there who do lead with the principle. And there's some organizations who put it out there. But even I've got friends at Cato who I talk to, as you know, Cato, one of the leading libertarian think tanks. And I say, you don't talk about the principle enough. You're giving positions on issues and you go through the whole thing and you never mention the principle. How are we ever going to make progress? Look, if our movement hinges on this one principle and we don't even mention it and we sure don't talk about it, how could we ever expect to grow our movement? It doesn't make sense. So I think we're our own worst enemy. I think it is consistent with human nature. I'm optimistic because I think that we have some ways to do a better job at this. And I'm certainly, as you know, with the Live and Let Live movement. And by the way, anybody listening to this, if they're interested, should just go to liveandletlive.org. Take a look how we're leading with the principle, leading with the one thing we need to lead with. I think if we do a better job explaining that, people will find it's consistent with our nature. It's win-win. It's benevolent. It allows people to act in their, at least ways they believe are consistent with their self-interest, if not immediate self-interest, and certainly long-term self-interest. We have the better argument, Walter. All we need to do is make it. And because of this, I'm optimistic about things. All we got to do is communicate the message to more people. We don't need everybody, but more people in a way that they will listen and can understand it. Because if they actually do that, we'll win every one of those. Because the alternative is to say, no, Mark, I disagree with you. I'm in favor of initiating force or fraud or coercion. How long is it going to take us to have fun? How much fun can we have with that position?
Well, again, you make a very, very good case for the wrong view. Let me comment on a few points that you make. Yes, the Supreme Court is very good on guns, but if Biden adds 4 more pinko justices, the Supreme Court won't help, and even the threat will make them pull back a little, as the threat of FDR against the Supreme Court during the during FDR period. He threatened the Supreme Court to pack the Supreme Court, and then all of a sudden the Supreme Court found everything, all these crazy cockamamie things that previously they had been rejecting. Now all of a sudden it was constitutional. So I'm not counting on the Supreme Court. Let me tell you a personal story. I have 3 women in my life: my wife, my daughter, and my sister. All pinkos, total pinkos. And my wife threatens to out me. She threatens to say, well, I've been with him 50 years. He hasn't converted me. He can't convert anyone. He can't convert anyone out of a paper bag. Don't listen to him. I mean, she's just kidding. But at least she'll talk to me about it. And then when I give her this stuff, well, is it really justified to pull a gun on innocent people and make them give money? She'll give me, well, what about the poor? My sister and my daughter won't even speak to me about it. Whenever I try to talk to them, they just say, let's talk about something else. I mean, they're very nice to me. I love them. They love me. But I'm 0 for 3. Why am I 0 for 3? We have the better arguments. They are very hardwired against this. They won't listen. They just bloody won't listen. they keep saying, well, I don't want to talk about it. Well, what can you do? I mean, yes, we have the better argument, and yet where are we? We're not doing that well. Why? In karate, what you do is you punch the other guy. In judo, what you use is the other guy's momentum. So if the other guy is charging at you, you throw him over your shoulder, you use his momentum. Well, what's the momentum of the average person? Namely, what's their human nature? What's their hard wiring? It is not free enterprise. Their natural inclination is explicit benevolence, not implicit benevolence. Implicit benevolence is markets. It's just alien. The idea that through a market you could actually help people. I tell my students about cooperation, and I say, look, basketball cooperation is very important. There are 5 guys, and if they all shoot and they don't pass the ball when one of their teammates is sitting under the basket for an easy shot, well, no matter how good they are, they're going to lose. And then I give the regatta. You have 8 guys that look like Mike Tyson, and they all row in opposite ways. Well, guys that look like you and I could beat them because they're not cooperating. And economics is the way to cooperate. But it's alien to people. They just don't get it. They don't like it. It's like an uphill battle with the rock of Sisyphus. I was a philosophy major in college, and then I got religion. Namely, I got libertarianized.
Yeah,
and I was wondering, which is the better vehicle to promote liberty, philosophy or economics? So I started taking masters in philosophy and in economics, half and half. Namely, I would take 3 classes in philosophy and 2 in economics, and then 2 and 3 the other way. And then finally, I decided that economics is the better vehicle. I still think economics is the better vehicle. But let's look at philosophy. Now, there's one guy who we haven't mentioned, and we have to mention. His name is Robert Nozick. Robert Nozick was a full professor at Harvard at age, 12. Well, I'm kidding. I think he was like the youngest full professor at Harvard ever, maybe at 25 or 28 or something like that. And he wrote this book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And the whole thing is the NAP. He did very little on economics. He's a philosopher. He did it on philosophy. And he had this wonderful, wonderful, magnificent phrase that I repeat over and over again, and that is, capitalist acts between consenting adults. The left is always going on about any act between consenting adults, and they usually mean sex or drugs or something like that, and that's fine. And what Nozick tried to do is say, well, how about capitalist acts between consenting adults? You bought that white shirt, a lovely white shirt, for $20. Don't you have a right to do that? And should anyone tell you have price controls on that? So what Robert Nozick did was promote exactly what you say should be promoted. And he did it brilliantly. That book is really he's not an anarchist, but, give him a 99 out of 100. And what is the philosophy profession? It's all Rawls. And Nozick devoted about 100 pages, and he ripped Rawls, not a new one, but 10 new ones. He just obliterated Rawls. And yet, one of my colleagues in the philosophy department asked me to come and speak because the whole course was on Rawls' book. And he wanted me to talk about Nozick. And to me, if I had a course, I would do both books. But in the philosophy area, Nozick is perhaps the most famous philosopher within philosophy. And yet virtually all philosophy professors are a bunch of pinkos. How do you explain that? Well, I know how I explain that, and the way I explain it is that human nature is not compatible with libertarianism. Human nature, the momentum, getting back to judo, the momentum is towards socialism. Look at Bernie Sanders. He's got millions of young kids. Now, it's true. What's that aphorism? If a young man is not a socialist at age 20, he has no heart. If he's still a socialist at 50, he has no brain. But the point, so maybe, hopefully, all these young kids that are Bernie, when they're 50, they'll be more rational, hopefully. But right now, how do you explain this man's attraction for socialism? And we have almost controlled experiments. East Germany and West Germany, North Korea and South Korea, the same people, the same culture, the same history, the same everything. And yet, due to an accident of war, one North Korea and East Germany went one way, and South Korea and West Germany went the other way. And we see what's going on even nowadays. Well, not so much East Germany and West Germany, but North and South Korea. You look at night and there are no lights in North Korea, and South Korea is all lit up. And where was the migration pattern? Were people trying to get into North Korea? Were people trying to get into East Germany? No, they were trying to get out of East Germany into West Germany, and they were killing them as they left. And this is socialism, and Bernie is a socialist, and he had his what do you call it, honeymoon in Russia, and this is not Russia nowadays. This is Russia when it was the USSR. And Bernie is sort of like the Pied Piper, and you got millions of kids, following him, and to say that human nature is compatible with libertarianism, I have problems with that. Now, when you tell people about the principle of the non-aggression principle, and is it justified to use violence and take money from the rich, and not crony capitalist rich, but people who earned it honestly? Bill Gates, most of what he earned it honestly. He made a better computer. Ray Kroc made a better burger. What's his name? Made a better mouse. Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse.
Disney.
Disney. These guys made their money honestly, and if you tell my sister or my wife or my daughter that it's unjust to go and take their money and give it to the poor, they'll think you're heartless. So I've only got an hour to do, and we've got only 7 more minutes, and I started, so I'll let you have the last few words.
Sure. Well, let me start by agreeing with you on the scariest thing that I think is going on today, the court packing threat. This is a very serious problem, much more serious than I think most people realize. I talk about in my book, FDR's threat to pack the court. And we still suffer with this today because people think, well, the court didn't get packed. The reason the court didn't get packed was because in 1937, the court decided a case called West Coast Hotel versus Parish. And what they did, in essence, in that case was radically change how they reviewed cases. They came up with these ideas of scrutiny. They said certain things are minimum scrutiny, and those certain things are going to be economic liberties and property rights. There's no reason in the Constitution to treat economic liberties as the sort of redheaded stepchild, if you will, because the Constitution talks about life, liberty, and property the same way. But the Supreme Court, in order to avoid the court packing, radically changed the way they do business. We're still stuck with this today. If you're arguing up at the Supreme Court and you want the law to be found constitutional, then you're going to argue, well, this is an economic liberty or property rights. And you and I know that everything is a property right. So this is always a good argument for the other side. If you want the thing to be found unconstitutional, then you'll argue this is an individual liberty. And there are some, right? The things that are specifically listed in the Bill of Rights, like freedom of speech and these fundamental rights, these are strict scrutiny. And if they apply strict scrutiny, almost always they'll find, not always, but lots of times they'll find that this is unconstitutional. So if I could go back and say to the framers of the Constitution, look, first of all, I would have said, don't do it. It's listen to the anti-federalists, they're right. But second, I would say, if you're going to do this, you must constitutionally limit the number of justices on the Supreme Court so this can't happen. So I'm very concerned about this. I don't know if this is actually going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think there's enough, because we're going to have 300 Supreme Court justices at some point. What I would love to see is the Supreme Court fashion a rule that says this violates due process or something like that, and the number is 9, and that's it, and that's the end of that. There is, I believe, a statute that says it's fixed at 9 now, but they could, of course, change that statute. So I am worried about that. I think that is a problem, but it's a problem that's in the law now, and it's a problem that would be remedied if more people had in their hearts, which is the place we need to speak to them about the principle. So that is a point well taken. Philosophy professors, I do not think are representative of the average person. I don't think that the average person is reading Nozick's book or knows what's in it or understands, and that's because it's a philosophy text, and the average person doesn't read these things. This is why we have a 1-minute video on the Live and Let Live website, right? And it doesn't take that long to actually explain the principle. And then I wanted to sort of finish up by saying, Walter, I would love to have a shot at convincing either your wife or your daughter or your sister. But I wouldn't want you to torpedo me by saying, Mark believes what I believe, and now I'm going to have Mark talk to you about it. It would be better if you approach them and say, you know, there's this guy I spoke to. He's got a totally different idea. It's called Live and Let Live. And it seems interesting to me. I think you might like it. He's talking about aspirational values and voluntary kindness and things like. If you lead with the aspirational value, we should run an experiment, Walter, because the best, most consistent, concise, eloquent libertarian on the planet is Walter Block. And you have worked on these three people for years and years and years with no success. I would like to try an experiment. And I would like to try to lead with the aspirational values and get them interested and open-minded, because I know, I haven't met any of the three of them, but I know if they sit back and they honestly listen to the principle in a way that's not biased by, oh, this is what my husband or my dad or my brother has been telling me for years, they're going to have to agree with that principle. And if they understand that I'm concerned about the poor and I'm advocating that people should voluntarily act this way and that we shouldn't violate the rule. And this is important because we have two choices here with our moral views. Choice number one, we're going to try to impose them on everybody through force by making them in the law, which means we're going to have an endless struggle forever. Some religious Muslims will say, hey, you know, Sharia law is the best morality, and let's force that on them. What would we say to these people if we go down this road? I prefer to take the other road, where we say, look, good morality, like I agree and Bernie agrees and your wife agrees, that morality that we all agree on because we're all good and kind people, even when in cases when we agree on our morality, we got to be big enough to take it out of the law. And the law is just this little minimal, basic, what I like to call in my book, the least common denominator of morality, which is the principle we're talking about. I think I got a reasonable shot at convincing one of them. And I would further say that if you give me the shot and I convince one of them, what I would like in exchange for this great service, I would love for you to come visit me in Arizona and sit in my backyard. And like I've done with some other people in the libertarian movement, I've had people come out and speak at my conferences, and I've said, look, yes, I'll do this and that, but the one condition I want is you come out and sit in my backyard and let me talk about freedom and peace and the principle as long as I want, and hash it back and forth with you. And that's what I would like in exchange if I can convince one of them. So I would like the opportunity, but I want to say, Walter, as always, we have far more agreement than we have disagreement. I'm not really sure we have any disagreement here at all. I think we're both frustrated that something that we know for sure would be better for our fellow brothers and sisters, and that we know for sure is more just and more ethical and raises standards of living, that we've done such a bad job at communicating it to our fellow brothers and sisters. I'm more optimistic about our ability to do better going forward than you are, but time will tell.
I changed my mind. I want to get the last word, and the last word is, let's look at this debate. Forget about the substance of it. It was amiable. We learned from each other. This is sort of the model of the way people should debate each other. Whereas I've seen libertarians debate and they start screaming at each other. I mean, it's just preposterous. So let me thank you again for being a great debating partner or a conversational partner or whatever. It's an honor and a privilege to have these discussions with you.
Walter, you've been a hero of mine since the day I met you, which is probably close to 30 years ago. The first time I ever read your book, Defending the Undefendable, and I went from chapter to chapter, and I said, there's no way he's going to convince me on this. And then I read the chapter and I thought, damn, but definitely this next one. I've been waiting for the ticket scalper or the dishonest cop or whatever. And as I read each chapter, I thought, man, he's right about every one of these things. And you've been a hero of mine ever since. And I've just enjoyed these conversations. And I'm really glad we recorded it, if for no other reason, just so I can watch them again and enjoy it.
Take care. Always good. And we'll do it again in a couple of weeks.
Sounds fantastic. All right. Peace, my brother, and enjoy every moment.
Take care.